Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today, Purdeep Sangha, founder and CEO. Purdeep is a globally recognized strategic advisor, best-selling author, and TV show host, celebrated for his mastery in business strategy and personal performance. His holistic approach seamlessly blends work and life, making him the go-to expert for those striving for excellence in all aspects of their lives. Purdeep, welcome to the show.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me.
No problem, no problem at all. Now, before we go into it, there is a little bit of an icebreaker we like to do on the show. And your question for today is, which cartoon character do you most identify with and why?
Yeah, that's a cool question. There's so many growing up watching so many Saturday morning cartoons. Um, I gravitated towards so many. So it's not when you say identify with, I can say probably one that I like the most as well, and I kind of think is a little bit relevant for anybody. But for me, I like He-Man. So I like He-Man because he's just an everyday, ordinary guy, and then he has to put on his He-Man persona and really go out there and do some serious work. So that's what kind of resonates with me. I've always been a fan. I was big into working out, still am, and so I think physical strength and stepping up into your potential is everything that we do in terms of the work that I do and the work that our business and our organization does.
That's an excellent choice, and I think I would have chosen He-Man as well for myself. So let's dig right into it. Pradeep, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background, your history, your journey, and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in British Columbia. My parents immigrated from India to Canada in the early 70s. So I was born in British Columbia. I was born in a small town called Kelowna, and a beautiful place to grow up. In fact, when I grew up there, I really didn't realize how amazing it was until I actually moved away. Phenomenal upbringing from the perspective of I grew up on an orchard. So my parents had an orchard. So that's basically literally how I grew up, was in the trees, in nature, sometimes the entire day without actually interacting with human beings. So I had a really unique upbringing from that perspective. And then I also had obviously my parents were business owners. I saw them in terms of their struggles, their challenges, but also some of their successes, because I was always fascinated. Like, how are my parents doing well compared to other people in the same industry that keep complaining, even though they have the access to the exact same resources? And my parents weren't even educated. So they had certain things. Mainly, they knew how to work hard. They knew how to utilize their resources and be effective and not waste things and really work as a team. So I started to study business at a very young age, but I also had this fascination with human potential and predominantly the mind. So I started to study the brain. At that time, it was called brain science. At grade 6, we had a substitute teacher come in. He was from Europe. And on the chalkboard back in those days, he wrote a number of words on the chalkboard, put circles around them, and then connected them with lines and said, "This is a mind map." At that time, mind maps were a thing in Europe, predominantly in the UK. And in North America, it wasn't big at all. In fact, that concept really wasn't around. And so I was fascinated. I went up to the teacher. I said, "Hey, what is this mind map thing?" And he said, "If you're interested, go look up some famous inventors like Leonardo da Vinci, even scientists like Einstein." And I went to the library at the time because they didn't have obviously the internet where you were looking at books. And I found some books and I started to read up on them. And there's something that was very consistent among all these people. And it was a couple of things. One was they were Renaissance at that time, like Leonardo da Vinci, Michael. They were Renaissance men, right? They were men that used different disciplines and interlaced them to really exceed in each of those disciplines. So they were connecting the dots in different areas. Secondly, they were using concepts such as drawings and mind maps. Just it wasn't really well known at that time. And these guys were inventors too. When I say guys, it was predominantly men in that day because women weren't really allowed to do this kind of stuff, right? And so I started to study that, and then it led to brain science, and then it kind of advanced into neuroscience when I was going to university, and performance psychology, which I started to study when I was 17 because I became a personal trainer. And I was working with people, and I realized that, hey, 80% of the people are not doing what I'm telling them to do. Literally, I was putting together their workout plan, their meal plans, and everything, and I was so fascinated by trying to help them, but they weren't executing. So that's when I started to study the psychological elements, why people do what they do, why they don't, what holds them back, the constructs of the mind, our conscious versus unconscious mind, and then emotional intelligence, all of that. So you can say fast forward to today, it's led me to have a skill set, an organization to have a skill set where we can work with people on the business side, but also on the human performance side. So we also built an entire business and partnered with 20 different universities, research institutions in Canada and the US to solve this question, which was how can a business professional perform at their highest potential and have a high quality of life at the same time? So we did a number of studies in that area over a number of years. And so we have a lot of research behind it, a lot of studies behind it. We use a lot of studies in our approach to help businesses perform better, but also help people perform better. But it's near and dear to my heart because I saw my parents struggle. And I always said, say to myself, what if my parents had guidance, whether it's coaching, advising, consultants, that could help them with a skill set that we have? Their life would have been a little bit different. And predominantly my dad, because his way of coping, because he came to a brand new country, didn't know the language, left all his family at home, and had the pressures because he was working minimum wage when he came here. It was probably less than minimum wage when I was talking to him. And so he had to feed a family. And also he was sending money back home for his parents and his siblings back home. And that was a lot of pressure on him. And his way of coping was alcohol because he worked so much, gave everything to my mom and my brother and I. And there was, I would say, not that there was little left, but he was kind of last on the priority list. So he struggled a lot with his alcoholism. Eventually, fast forward, he passed away in 2018. And so that's my driving mission, is to make sure other people are able to be successful in all areas of their life, not just business.
That's it's certainly an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And you're absolutely right, and it's admirable. And there are so many people that look at their performance, or they look at how they can do better in their lives, but they only mainly focus on either one area, right? There's you look at business, or you look at kind of your personal side, but it's interesting to me that you take the whole the holistic approach, and you look at everything and you try to blend them together in sort of this synergy. Now, you a little bit before the show, you were talking about performance anxiety and how this all comes in. So just going back to your story and how when you were advising and coaching these individuals with their fitness plans, do you think it was performance anxiety that kept them from completing those, or was it various other reasons?
No, I think there were other reasons. For example, they might not have had a support network. So someone trying to get fit or get healthier and eat healthier, if they go back home and everybody's eating junk food, it's harder for them to do that, right? So the environment was one factor. The second factor, there's a number of different beliefs that we have as human beings, and there's 9 particular beliefs. So it could be for some people, they're not motivated enough. They just don't have a strong enough desire. Perhaps there's a conflicting goal, right? Maybe they have a goal to lose weight, but then they also have a goal to fit in with their friends, and their friends aren't really into exercising, right? And so there's a challenge there from a social circle perspective. And so it could be a belief that I don't have enough time, right? Sometimes they don't even know, like, even though I would put together a meal plan for them, sometimes they would even just tell themselves, I don't know how to make the stuff, right? So there's a number of different factors that people had at that time and still do that really stops them from doing what they want to do or having what they want to have. And the majority of it is internally, and a lot of the times they don't even know from a conscious level what it is. So part of my job is to really figure out, okay, what is it that's holding them back? And there's a system that we use, but it's not necessarily performance anxiety, because performance anxiety comes into play when there's extremely high stakes, or when there's social pressure, or they're very uncertain of how to do certain things, or they've screwed up in the past. So for working out, it wasn't really that. Other things, yeah, like public speaking, performance anxiety is absolutely applicable. But for working out, there were other challenges.
Okay. And that certainly makes sense. And we as human beings are unique in every aspect, right? So can you walk us through the process? How do you narrow that down? Let's say that a client comes into you and they really don't know where to start. and they say, I want to be better here, but I don't know. How do you start in on that when they don't?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. It's kind of a loaded question too, because it depends on the individual. First of all, I have to kind of familiarize myself with their world because I'm a completely different person. I'm an outsider. I have no idea what their life is like. Although, even though they're telling me, this is something that's really important for us all to understand as human beings. We have tens of thousands of thoughts going through our mind, but how many words actually come out of our mind? A fraction of our thoughts. So how we speak and what we say is only a fraction of what we're actually thinking. So even when someone is saying something to me, it's only a fraction of their thoughts. It's only a fraction of their emotions. So I have to figure out, okay, what their world really looks like. And sometimes that takes a few times just to get to know the person a little bit. I'll ask some very specific questions. But once I get a good understanding of what their world is like, then I try to figure out, okay, which of these three buckets is this person's challenge? Is it their strategy? Is it their state? Or is it the systems that they use? So strategy is really the direction and the approach. It's their ability to make decisions and really find, like, goal setting, for example. Do they plan effectively? Do they know how to recalibrate themselves and get back aligned if they get off track? That's strategy. So if they have an incomplete or incorrect strategy, they could be working as hard as they want, but they're just going in the wrong direction. The second part is the state aspect, how they choose to show up every moment. And that's so important because I can give two different people the exact same strategy, but if one person shows up with an optimal or better state, they're going to perform better. So I have to figure out if it's a state element. And then the next part is really systems. And the system part is really, what are the systems that they're using? What kind of habits do they have? What kind of routines do they have? What kind of technology are they using? Do they automate things? Do they delegate? Or are they trying to do everything themselves? All of those systems are what we take a look at. What measurements are they using to really track their progress or success? And so once I identify which bucket or buckets are challenged, then we go a little bit deeper. So we use a very systematic approach there, but everything comes back to those three buckets. Is it your state? Is it your strategy? Or is it your systems?
Yeah, and it sounds like a very in-depth process for sure. It sounds like a lot of work. So, I mean, the immediate question that comes to my mind is, if I come to you, I mean, how often do people come to you and say, "Oh, that just sounds like way too much work to get to even to know myself," and they just sort of, throw in the towel right then,
Yeah,
right?
I don't really, yeah, it's really interesting because, and that might be actually a good thing because too much work for individuals means that they're most likely they don't want it bad enough, right? And so that's a correlation for me. And I have to choose at this point in time in my career to work with people who want it bad enough. Because trying to convince someone, that's one of the biggest challenges that I've had the toughest time helping people overcome. And I realized that it's not necessarily a waste of time, it's just a wasted effort. And so an individual who comes to us is most likely motivated to do something, and they are strongly motivated. And if they aren't strongly motivated, then I can't necessarily work with them because it takes too much time and effort to try to get them motivated. What we can show them now, if they have, and we can help them get even more motivated, but they have to have a certain threshold. So if someone says, it's too much work, um, no, that's different than saying, I'm trying to figure out how to have enough time to do this, right? So time is, we can help them find the time for sure. Or even the energy. But if someone makes a statement of this is too much work, it's a blanket statement, which tells me they just don't want it enough.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And just swinging back, in terms of procrastination, how does procrastination fit into when you're trying to?
Yeah, it's a procrastination. There's a number of factors for this, and I'm going to take um, there's individuals. I'll try to break this down here. There's individuals that have consistent, I guess, behavior when it comes to procrastination, and it holds them back in all areas of their life, almost virtually all areas of their life. In that particular instance, it's more of a personality style and trait, which needs to be addressed. And sometimes that requires a professional psychologist or a therapist or something deeper, right? Because there may be something deeper as a result of that. But sometimes people have challenges or they procrastinate on certain things in their life. Maybe they're really good at getting their work stuff done, but they procrastinate on home stuff. Or, they're really good at getting most of the stuff done at work and home, but they procrastinate on working out in particular. So the thing that we got to figure out is why are they procrastinating and how to overcome it. Typically, there's a number of different factors, right? There could be fear of doing the activity. if they haven't done it before, if they're not skilled at it, right? No one likes to do stuff they're not good at, right? Unless they have this real strong drive to get good at something. That requires a different type of mentality for a person. But nobody likes to do stuff that they're not good at. So that part can hold people back. It's a natural procrastination. And it can be frustrating. And when someone is wanting to do something and they realize that the last time that they did it, for example, if I'm learning to play guitar and the last time I just couldn't get the strings where I just couldn't get the tune, then the next time I go at it, I'm going to think about the last period or the last time I was practicing, and I'm not going to be as motivated, right? So that could be another reason. Procrastination also has to do with, do you have enough arousal, which means that you have enough drive. So sometimes, for example, if we take the classical studies that have been done on students that wait till the last minute the night before to study for an exam, right? And so it's been shown over and over again, it's not the best method. It's temporary, doesn't work that well. You're better off studying throughout the week or the weeks to get there. But the reason why some people are really good at that is because they get so aroused because that anxiety increases their level of arousal to such a degree that they can get focused, that they can get on track. And for some people, that anxiety actually gets them into what we call the state of the zone. And without that anxiety, without that procrastination, they're not able to get themselves into the zone because there's not enough pressure put on them. So procrastination can be a positive thing for people that like to have a certain amount of pressure before they actually get into the zone of what we call optimal performance.
That's very interesting, and there are a lot of people that they claim to work well under pressure, likely for those same reasons, right? But long term, what are the effects of that?
It really depends because some people are just built that way, right? And and this is the interesting part. They originally thought that there's what we call the inverted U curve. It's kind of like a bell curve where they said, you know what, amount of anxiety or pressure, there's an optimal level and then it drops off. What they've started to show now is that everybody is different on that bell curve. And so we have to find out where each person, because each individual is different, fits on that bell curve. And someone can perform significantly high under a high amount of pressure. They need that high pressure and they can do it over and over and over again. Very few people, I would say, are we're talking about extreme athletes and high risk sports, for example, skydivers, all that kind of stuff, right? Skiers, for example, heli skiers. That's just how they get into the zone. It requires a lot of energy though, because it's not necessarily the amount of anxiety, let's just say, Chris. It's more around intensity. It's more around the length of time that you're in that state. So if a person is constantly in a high anxiety state, right, consistently, their body will eventually start to tell them, hey, this isn't working, and it'll start to break down because too much cortisol, for example, is not good for the body. It stops the immune system. It actually impacts cognitive function and decision making and so forth. So, and it can even, hurt your memory. For example, you have people that have a lot of anxiety end up having memory losses and they're not able to form, or they're not even able to learn as effectively. So it has a lot of consequences. Coming back to what you're asking is what's the long-term effect? If the person isn't aware, the most important thing though is being aware of when you need to recover. So it's more about recovery, effective recovery, more than the degree of anxiety. So someone who has to be under extreme amount of stress to perform, they also have to be aware that they need to recover that much more too. So that's where it comes into play.
And you mentioned something interesting too, and it's an interesting topic to discuss. So when you're working with people, or in your opinion, which is the kind of the bigger contributor? Because you have the chemical aspects, and then you have more like the mental emotional aspects, right? So when somebody is feeling that rush, they have adrenaline or they have cortisol rushing through them. Do you think that the mental aspect has a bigger contribution than the chemical aspect, or would the chemical aspect have a bigger contribution to the mental aspect?
Well, I think long term, if we're talking about control of ourselves and function, then the mental aspect is absolutely critical because our brain is a central unit. But I have to say this too, they are intertwined and they impact each other significantly. because our physiology, the way the brain is designed, the brain isn't designed in isolation. The brain was designed to work the body, right? It wasn't designed just to sit there as a CPU on its own, um, and just compute away. That's not what the brain was designed. It was designed to say, okay, what's happening in this body? How do we move it? How do we get food? How do we procreate? How do we fight off disease? How do we heal ourselves? That's how the body was designed. So it's designed to take information from the body and create systems and approaches and then reflect back to the body what needs to be done. So whatever happens in the body impacts the brain, right? It impacts the mind. So it's a cyclical effect. But knowing how to modify our mindset is very important, because this is the whole placebo effect. This is the whole, they've shown even now through the last 10 years of meditation studies, for example, in terms of what that can do to people's health and behavior. And with healing, there's a lot more studies coming out now about that. So the mind itself is so powerful that we can heal ourselves and we can shift our physiology to a certain degree as well.
That is, that's sounds pretty amazing. Do you have any examples where the brain has affected the physiology? I mean, we know things about like the adrenaline and the cortisol, but anything physical, anything visible that you can think of that?
Yeah, there's been, I don't have the cases here myself, but they've have cases where they have schizophrenic patients, for example, where you can actually see muscle tone change. You can even see structural changes, for example, and tint changes in their eye color. Now you're going to be thinking, what the heck does that mean? Well, the mind is so powerful that if someone believes that they are a completely different human being, which is part of schizophrenia, their body will actually change and be more congruent to it. So that is, that's just kind of an extreme example, but there are also studies that have been done, for example, and the average person can do this too, is where you even look at your hand or you say a certain part of my body is getting warmer and warmer and warmer. It's actually been shown that that part of your body will actually increase in temperature. Might be slight, but it will actually increase in temperature. So that's how powerful the mind is.
Yeah, it reminds me. I hate going back to Hollywood because I know they sensationalize things, but there was a movie I just want to blank on the name of it right now, but he had split personalities. And in the end, his last personality was like this beast. He had the physiological change where he didn't outwardly change, but his muscles tones got harder, and he couldn't be hurt or scratched or whatever. It was just really exaggerated, but it sounds like that there is some scientific basis in scientific research that kind of backs that up. I guess my question to you is that you've read these studies. How long do those changes generally take to happen? I imagine it's not instantaneous.
Oh, some of these can be instantaneous. Like if you're talking about temperature changes, it could be done within 60 seconds, for example. And so there's a lot more studies that are being done on muscle strength now. So for example, when someone is saying the words that they use and their emotional state impacts their muscle tone. So if someone is talking in a negative manner, saying, I suck at this, their muscle strength actually dramatically decreases, versus I'm strong, I got this. They actually have stronger, increase their higher level of strength, and they've been able to measure this. So this is very important. And through performance psychology, they've tied two emotions particularly with increased performance, right? If we're talking about mental aspect, one is anger, because anger can actually help people become stronger and perform better, but also joy and happiness, right? On the flip side, they've tied sadness, for example, guilt and shame and everything to poor performance. And a lot of that has to do with muscle strength as well. And so the body can instantaneously change based on our mindset. Here's another prime example. Anybody who's been in a life-altering situation, for example, a car accident, or they're in a robbery, or whatever that looks like, or they have a loved one who's struggling. Let's just say someone is drowning in a pool. You have such a high degree of adrenaline that's shooting through your body instantly changes, right? You have a higher level of strength and power to be able to do that. So, and it's all through chemicals. It's all through neurochemicals, through hormones and endorphins. So our body can change very fast based on our mindset. And spontaneous remission, for example, this has been now documented as well, where people have a certain condition, whether it's cancer or something else, and all of a sudden it's gone in a day later, and people and doctors are wondering what the hell, what the heck, excuse my language, what the heck happened, right? Um, it's the mind is extremely, extremely powerful.
That is something that has been going around for decades or more than decades, probably, well, thousands of years if you go back to the spiritual teachings as well. So, do you believe that there's truth in that in terms of your mindset, where somebody feel there's been studies done on this music, right? So to say classical music is the best for making somebody calm, making them more intelligent. With babies, they tell you not to listen to Metallica when you're pregnant, that sort of thing, right? Is there any truth to that? Because I mean, there are individuals that they get pumped up and they feel more happy or joyful when they listen to these kinds of, like, even death metal, right? But I mean, is there a correlation to the actual sounds or music that's being played, or is it more the emotional state that those sounds are creating?
My personal belief, and through the research that I've done and that we've done, the answer is yes. And here's why. And I'm going to start from the very beginning. Einstein, one of his most famous quotes said, "Everything is energy, and it's as simple as that." Right? His whole equation, E equals mc squared, goes back to anything that goes below the speed of light becomes more like matter, right? And this is essentially what he's saying. We're walking, talking energy. That's just operating uh, at a speed that's lower than light. So what does that mean? That means if we are energy, and a lot of this energy, basically, the equation is that it's based on a frequency, right? And so electromagnetic energy, all different kinds of energy has a frequency. So if we are walking around, they've been able to measure it, that we all have unique types of frequencies within our body. So if we are in agreement with that there's a frequency that we have, guess what? Music has a frequency. And so our body can actually align with that frequency. It's not a coincidence that when we listen to sad music, we get more sad. It's not a coincidence when we listen to happier music that we get happier. It's not a coincidence that when we listen to more relaxing and Zen music, we get more relaxed. Or when people are in a heavy metal concert that they're thrashing. It's because the frequency is what our brain is actually connecting with. They've actually done reverse studies on this where they've done EEG scans, which is basically, you'll see it's kind of like an ECG when you measure your heart rate, for example, and your variability, where for your brain, they've played music, and through the brain waves, they're able to determine what type of music that is. So that's the impact of music on our brains.
Wow, that's that is something that maybe makes me wish I hadn't listened to so much Metallica in high school.
Yeah, that'll get you angry.
Yeah, that's
Metallica is pretty good. I remember those days. They had good music.
yeah, it's interesting though, but this all this information and the studies. I know that they started out with plants and then they moved on to people, but it does make me wonder if the decisions that we make today, even though we're making them sort of lightly because it's we want to fit in or we want to do this, if it's actually impacting us in a bigger way than we realize.
I believe so, because if we think about it, now this is kind of crossing the zone into more of the spiritual aspect, but if we are all energy and all living beings, and even matter is energy, well, we do know that energy is transferred, right? We know that, and they've shown studies on this too, the impact of other people's energy on each other. So when we are in the presence of someone who might be in a negative state, for example, does that impact our energy? Absolutely. It impacts our energy. We can tell right away, like the room changes, right? The vibe in the room changes. That's what they talk about. And it impacts us. So yes, I do believe whether it's healing ourselves, impacting other people, helping other people heal, whether it's plants or animals, we all intersect with each other. In fact, there's studies that have coming out just recently that are talked about this whole concept of the movie Avatar. If we take a look at a lot of the movies, they're based on concepts and studies that some of them have already been done in science or they're being done in science, but that whole concept is what's been studied right now. And they've actually shown now that the root system in the Amazon and even rainforests in British Columbia, for example, they tested where it directly, I'm not exactly sure how they did the studies, but it impacts the wildlife that live in the tree or trees. And for example, in the Amazon, it was monkeys. So we're able to measure, for example, soil and the connection to monkeys. And so this is really, really interesting in terms of the studies that are being done here. I think next 20 years is going to be pretty exciting because we're going to have a lot more of this information. I think people are going to be more aware of, yeah, are we impact the environment and the environment impacts us significantly. We need to do things differently than we've been doing over the last 100 years.
Oh, for sure. And it actually that study you just mentioned reminds me of one I saw recently from well, I don't know if it's recent, but I saw it recently from Neil deGrasse Tyson that when a tree is cut down in the Amazon or another forest, what it does is it actually shares its nutrients to all the other plants around it. Even if they're not the same species. So the fact that the forest does that, I mean, I think I'm paraphrasing, but I think he even said, the plants are doing it better than we are.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some interesting things that are going to come out in the future if we actually pay attention to what's around us, right?
Well, here's a really cool thing that scientists have talked about. The air that we breathe, the molecules that we are made of, the atoms that we are made of, I should say, part of those we have the same ones that the dinosaurs had. So our bodies are partly made up of the same atoms that made up dinosaurs. And some estimates have said that some of our atoms were part of potentially 4 or 5 stars in the universe. So if that is true, that's a significant, I'm going to say it's a really interesting thing to think about that whatever's made up of our body, there's some part of it that was part of a star that might have lived millions or billions of years ago.
Oh well, no, for sure, it gets even more basic than that too. I mean, the water we're drinking, right? I mean, nobody really thinks about this, but it's the same water that's been, we're drinking the same water and eating the same basic materials that the dinosaurs themselves ate too, right? They just passed through a few times. But it is rather interesting to think about that, and it raises another question. All these ideas, it gets a little bit outside the realm, but it kind of ties into spirituality a little bit. All of these ideas, where do you think they originally kind of came from, where this knowledge kind of comes from then? Because like even thousands of years ago, people were talking about, we're all stardust, right? So how or where do you think that information comes from?
It's an interesting one. And again, this is just total personal belief because there's no real scientific studies that can prove this. But I believe there's a collective consciousness or universal genius. And that's something that even the famous inventors talked about. So famous inventors like Leonardo da Vinci, and that, this is a concept that I've used since I was a kid because they said that it's not necessarily their ideas. They were just tapping into something greater that was feeding them. And so many of our, for example, conscious or unconscious aha moments, could that be a collective genius of something or some kind where we've just downloaded information that's come to us? In the scientific world, they talk about that being the unconscious mind, that our brain is processing behind the scenes, and all of a sudden it comes up with something and says, "Aha, here you go, right? Here's your aha moment for you." But I do believe that there is a higher consciousness, that there is a collective consciousness or genius, and I think it all comes back to the math element of the universe being simply just a bunch of information. And that information is based on math equations. Now, that is way over my head because I'm not a mathematician. And, the physics is as far as I typically get. Once it gets to the math side, it's like a little bit past me to think in terms of being that granular. But I think it all comes back to just a universal source of information and a universal source of energy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is all the source, right? I mean, I think the most popular example given was something about the ocean. And if you take a cup and you take the water out of the ocean, right? Like what is the cup and what is the water inside it then? Is it still the ocean?
Yeah, really good question.
I think that was I think that is kind of, and again I'm butchering it terribly because the whole concept is very very big, but that's kind of the gist of it. Um, anyway, Pradeep, you've got a lot going on. You've done a lot of research. Actually, you're doing more research constantly. What's next for you in this next year? Where do you see yourself in a year?
Wow, yeah, that's an interesting question. One of the things that I am contemplating in terms of a study, for us, we're focused on helping business professionals really excel. Like that's what we're going to continue to do, but we're doing more on the high performance space. We're getting more into we call it high performance. We've always been there, but we're also getting into more of the health side. So helping people from a health perspective. So we are expanding that side of the business. But I'm also doing more of this. I'm thinking about doing a formal study in this area of what we call collective growth, or you can even say collective coaching, whatever that looks like in terms of if we work with someone individually, what are the results compared to if we have them in a group? Does a group setting add a benefit and create some kind of a social accountability and social support? Or does it take away from the personalization? And so that's something that we're taking a look at because we do both. But what we're trying to get a sense of is what are some of the benefits of doing the group side that can really help people change? Because we do know that individuals, one of the biggest, toughest times or challenges that they have is trying to do things on their own. And if they have a supportive group that's going through the same challenges and they're close and they have that trust and they have a system to operate as a group, it can help. But we haven't done a formal study on that. So that might be something that we do.
That's actually really interesting that you brought up accountability, because accountability is very interesting because you're right. At least what I've found, and I know, well, a lot of other coaches and another lot of other business development experts have found is that it's easier for an individual to be sort of accountable to a group than it is to be accountable to themselves. Now, of course, there's many different reasons for this, but when you're working through that, how do you approach accountability?
Yeah, so here's the distinction for me because they're self accountability. So being accountable to yourself is self integrity. That's essentially what it is. And what we've identified is we have some traits that we studied in some of the most successful people. We're not talking about the richest people. We're talking about people that have, yeah, wealth and sometimes extreme wealth, but they also have good relationships, good health, good mindset. They're just joyful overall. And one of the consistent characteristics we're seeing too is, well, three. Optimism is one, discipline is the other, and self-integrity is another one. And those three are very much tied together because when someone has self-integrity and their discipline, they're more likely to be optimistic because they're actually getting the things done that they need to get done and they feel good about it. Whereas when someone doesn't do something that they told themselves they're going to do, there's guilt and there's shame. And that's hard to overcome sometimes, right? They might play it off like it doesn't impact them, but inside it does. Because if someone says, hey, I'm going to work out today, but they don't end up working out, there's a guilt factor involved, right? Even if they have to make up 100 excuses to say, I'm busy, I got to do this is higher priority. Inside, there's just something eating away, say, yeah, but you said you were going to. And are these kind of really excuses? So self-integrity is very, very important. At a group setting, there's an accountability factor, and there's a different layer. There's different layers. There's self-accountability, which is me holding myself accountable. Then there's what we say teammate accountability, meaning I am accountable to the teammates, right? Each individually. So if there's 10 teammates, I'm accountable to each of them or some of them. Right? So there's a second layer. Then I'm also accountable to the team as a whole, because a team as a whole is a separate entity. So there's a third layer, and then there's accountability for the person who is leading the team or the coach. So there's 4 layers of accountability there. So me to myself, me to another person on the team or other people on the team, and then me to the team as a whole, and then me to the person who's leading the team. So that's why the group accountability side can be extremely powerful. Well, hopefully that answers your question.
It does. It's just interesting to me. And again, I have I have these behaviors myself. I notice these behaviors in other people. It's just always fascinating to me how we can so easily hold ourselves accountable for others, but we can't really do it in some instances for ourselves. I just find it fascinating. That's all.
Yeah, that is a really fascinating one. And part of it, not that I want to say this, in this exact way, but it's sometimes we don't treat ourselves as well as we should. And it's it's a really interesting, how do I say it, dynamic in the mind. So for example, let's just use a simple example. Someone wants to get healthy and they want to get on diet, but they at some point in time they want to eat an ice cream cone, right? So now you're balancing what's my goal, losing weight or whatever this, and how is this one thing going to impact my goal? But I also want to do it. And what if it's just a one-off? Am I missing out on an experience in life, right? And is it really going to hold me back just having one ice cream cone, or do I just have to work out a little bit harder? See, now this is where all the variables come in. And when people aren't as equipped to make a decision based on those variables, it's hard for them. So now they're confused, like, do I eat it? Do I not eat it? And that confusion itself creates a whole dynamic rather than just saying, let me just eat it and figure out what I'm going to do as a result to make up for it. I'm just going to work out twice as hard tomorrow. So this is where sometimes decision-making matrices come in if it's high stakes. And this is just part of the mind. It's just part of how we operate the mind. And this is the interesting part of the mind, is sometimes it works for us and sometimes it works against us. And sometimes we just have to go with the flow. The challenge becomes, though, Chris, when it becomes a consistent pattern. So if I'm starting to eat ice cream cones every single week and it's impacting me, now it's become self-defeating, right? That's the challenge.
Okay. So a big part of it could be then just sort of recapping that a little bit in terms of group accountability. It's removing an uncertainty factor because we have more data points that say that we should behave and should do something a certain way than we do for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I would also say that there are different layers of accountability. And I would just say that there's just more layers of accountability. And sometimes, for example, sometimes people just forget to hold themselves accountable. Like they just forget. And so if there's a reminder, it helps. Now, the more reminders sometimes, and we do know that social pressure is huge for people. Like it's huge. It's significant. It can impact, like there's accountability coaches out there that are just there for accountability, to hold someone accountable. They know how to do things. They just need someone to hold accountable and just say, hey, look, did you do it? And so um, it's hard to just pin it on that one thing. I think there's a number of different factors when it comes to a group setting.
Well, we are coming up towards the end here. But before we start to wrap things up, was there anything that you felt maybe I should have asked, or anything that we should have covered that we haven't covered?
No, I think we hit some really good points there and great questions in terms of what you were asking. So I think we've covered quite a bit of stuff.
All right then. So right before we log off, then what's the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you?
Best way would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm most active on there. You can also connect with me on my newsletter. So it's purdeep.substack.com. And that's probably the most. I have a newsletter called Science of Winning, and you can connect with me through there.
All right, and to our listeners, don't worry about writing that down. We will, as always, have those in the notes of the show. And Pradeep, thank you so much for being on the show today, and really enjoyed having you. Might want to, we might be pestering you to come back and expand on some of those ideas. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in again and for your dose of motivation and inspiration. And just remember, if maybe you can't find that motivation or inspiration yourself today, maybe just be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.